Hello, and thanks so much for checking out the Coin Stories podcast video page. I'm Natalie Brunell, and I'm talking to Bitcoin's thought leaders about their backstories and the latest headlines. This podcast does not provide financial advice. This episode is powered in part by the Bitcoin Conference 2022. It's going to be held in Miami this year, April 6th through 9th, and it's going to be the biggest Bitcoin event in the world. All 4 days will be jam-packed with exclusive content, exciting announcements, and an incredible lineup of Bitcoin speakers, artists, and leaders. Day 1 is Industry Day for enterprising Bitcoiners who are looking to build a business or career within the ecosystem. Days 2 and 3 are General Conference Days featuring speakers like El Salvador President Nayib Bukele, who has promised a big surprise at the event, as well as CEOs like Michael Saylor, Elizabeth Stark, Jack Mallers, Adam Back, and hundreds more. The conference caps off on the 4th day with the world's first and largest Bitcoin music festival, Sound Money Fest, headlined by rapper and fellow Bitcoiner Logic. You're also going to hear from Steve Aoki, CL, Run the Jewels, Deadmau5, and many more. Last year's conference sold out, and this year's is on pace to be 3 times larger, so make sure you grab your tickets before it's too late. You can head to b.tc/conference and use the code COINSTORIES for 10% off your pass. Remember, those passes keep going up in price as we get closer. This episode is also powered by OKCoin, my favorite place to buy Bitcoin and dollar cost average without the crazy fees. OKCoin is the fastest growing exchange serving over 190 countries globally with the easiest onboarding and lowest fees around. They're on a mission to make learning about and buying Bitcoin easier than ever, and they're all about bringing more financial literacy to everyone, which is something I really care about as well. From being the only exchange to integrate Lightning to contributing over $1 million to Bitcoin core devs, they are doing incredible work to further the Bitcoin ecosystem. You can head to go.okcoin.com/Natalie for $50 in Bitcoin when you sign up. Super excited to share my guest today is my friend, Dennis Porter. Dennis and I co-host the bipartisan Bitcoin Twitter Spaces, which we hope you've been a part of. And he's a passionate political activist who's focused on defending Bitcoin's message in Washington, D.C., and wants to make sure that the people voting on regulatory issues are well informed. He's also the host of the Smart People-ish podcast. Here's Dennis. All right. Well, Dennis, thank you so much for joining me. I'm so excited to chat with you today, and congratulations on how quickly you are just rising to fame in this space.
Thanks, Natalie. I'm just trying to keep up with people like you and others out there. We've been having a lot of fun growing together in the space recently. We kind of started at the same time, so it's fun to watch each other grow.
Yeah, I'm super excited. So I want to learn a little bit more about you and how you got to becoming so passionate about Bitcoin. So I know you live in Portland, but are you from Portland? Tell me a little bit about your backstory.
Yeah, I was born in this area. I grew up here for the first 16 years of my life. Little stint in Alaska, little stints in California. But then when I was 16, my parents moved us to Juarez, Mexico, just across the border in Mexico. We lived there for 3 years. When I was younger, my parents, they still are missionaries, but we were missionaries. We went down there, lived there for 3 years on the border. It was an incredible experience. Learned a lot of lessons, had a lot of incredible things happen to me. When we moved back to this area where I live now, my parents then decided to kind of move to El Salvador, and that's when I really moved out on my own. I don't know if you know that, like, my parents have lived there for 6 or 7 years in El Salvador.
They've been
amazing. Friends. Yeah, that's really wild, actually. They've been there. They've been friends with Mike Peterson from Bitcoin Beach for years. The only thing I'll complain about, Natalie, is they didn't tell me that he was down there until like right before this whole thing happened. And they knew I was into Bitcoin for a long time. But things like that led to our relationship kind of rebuilding because, you know, when they left to go down to El Salvador and I stayed behind, I fell away from the church and stopped going. And that kind of became a rift between me and my parents. Oh. Well, Bitcoin somehow magically brought us back together because of all the things that are going on in El Salvador. And I've been getting my dad orange pilled, just like you've been doing, getting your dad orange pilled. And then also calling down there to help educate people about Bitcoin. But so
that's
go
fascinating.
Ahead.
Wait, but just real quick question, because you mentioned like a lot of lessons learned. Can you like pull one out from your young life when your family is going through this and living in different places?
Well, it's kind of cliche, but it's the obvious answer, which is that the difference between living in those countries when you're poor, you have nothing. I've seen people who literally are living in cardboard boxes and not just a couple people like we see with the homeless issue that we have here in the United States today. I mean, there's whole neighborhoods of people living in pallets with no running water, no sewage system. And so you really get to see just how bad it can get. But the craziest part about it all is despite how what Americans would think is just a terrible living situation, you'd still see kids smiling. You still see kids happy. Whereas like in America, you come here and a lot of kids just aren't happy. They're really dissatisfied. I haven't really quite figured out why the Americans are dissatisfied, but I did learn that you don't need things, you don't need stuff in order to be happy. And that was really the biggest lesson that I learned from down there, aside from just like, various other fun events that occurred. I mean, I've seen a lot of things. I've seen a lot of things, lots of violence down there. And so it's really wild to see just how different it can be on the other side of the border in so many different ways.
Wow. Well, why are they unhappier here? It's because comparison is the death of joy, Dennis. All of us just look at each other's lives on social media and we're just like, oh, that guy's got more than me. And I feel like that doesn't happen in other countries as much, especially places where they're not necessarily, involved in the kind of technology that we are. So why did your family end up in El Salvador?
I'm not exactly sure how they got there, just like I'm not exactly sure how we ended up in Mexico. It seemed like it was just like one day somebody asked them if they wanted to come down. We were in Mexico after the 2000, all the crashes that happened, right, that were going on. And my dad had kind of bought into these travel agencies after the tech boom bubble bursted. And what happened was the internet kind of ravaged them financially because they were selling still through travel agencies, which everyone knows today are basically bust. So after kind of losing everything, they went to meet with the pastor and he said, you guys should become missionaries because you don't really have a whole lot else going on in the United States. So that's kind of how it happened the first time. And the second time, it's a similar story. Just someone mentioned it. They decided to take a look at it and pull the trigger on it. Obviously, for me, it's different because I'm not in the church anymore. For them, it's a calling, right? That's what they feel called to do. Just kind of like how I feel called to speak about Bitcoin today.
So how old were you when I guess your parents stayed behind and you decided, were you in college? Like, were you old enough to be on your own? And what did you decide you wanted to do with your life?
When I was about 20 was when my parents moved to El Salvador and I stayed in the States up here. I didn't really know. For a long time, I'd always struggled finding what I wanted to do with my life, despite being someone who'd always had a good bit of ambition and thought that I was capable of a lot. The school system didn't treat me well. I ended up dropping out, getting my GED, tried college, just didn't work for me, didn't function for me. Ended up trying like 30 different jobs. I've tried like everything from Cutco, I think is it Peter McCormick who sold Cutco too, or there's someone else. There's another famous Bitcoiner who sold Cutco and was a carpet cleaner, was a waiter at Olive Garden. I've done pretty much every type of menial minimum wage job you could think of.
Wait, and why not? Like, why wasn't school your thing? Why there wasn't something you wanted to study really badly and some job that you envisioned having?
That's exactly it. There was nothing that I really saw myself doing. There was nothing that I was in particular passionate about. And also just didn't really have that strong desire to be at school. And when I was there, it just was unfocused and didn't care and felt like I was wasting my time. So I just left and started working instead and thought I'd figure my way out along the way. Eventually what happened is I got into doing event and club promotion stuff, became very unhealthy actually, in fact, and was, drinking and smoking all night, every night. It was more or less like a paid partier. That's to some extent, right? But what happened was I developed a really severe form of epilepsy and was totally incapable of keeping my work or my job and had to completely retire and was having really bad seizures almost every single day to the point where I had to take...
Out of nowhere? Out of the blue?
Yeah. Yes, yeah.
Wow, what caused that?
Most likely unhealthy lifestyle, but also because of it's genetic in my family. My mother had epilepsy when she was young.
Wow.
So it was very tough for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was very tough for me, and it was a lot to overcome. I thought my life was pretty much over. I would never be able to accomplish anything. They started putting me on very strong medication where my brain just kind of became zombie-like. Even today, I'm surprised that I can still formulate sentences because there was a point in my life where I couldn't put 3 words together in a single sentence because my brain was so foggy. So I battled through that.
I'm shocked to learn this. I mean, you're one of those people where whenever I hear you on Twitter Spaces, especially when it comes to any legislative issue, it's like, wow, this guy knows his stuff. He could riff for hours. This is unbelievable. Wow. So how did you overcome that?
A lot of hard work, a lot of focus on my health, Took me about 3 or 4 years. I used to weigh 135 pounds. Like I said, I was very thin, very unhealthy at 6'2". Now I weigh almost 210. So it's a big difference in my personal health, but also was very fortunate to find here locally in my area a guy that does physical therapy for brain disorders. So it could be epilepsy, it could be traumatic brain injury, could be Tourette's, anything. By the way, if you guys know anyone out there who has any of those issues, call me. This guy's like literally a magician. Yeah, he's world renowned for it. But I was fortunate to be in the same area and went to see him. And after several months, was able to come off any sort of medication and I'm about 99% healed now at this point in my life. So just tons of work, tons of focus on my health when it came to diet, nutrition, sleep, exercise, tons of different stuff. All combined, was able to overcome what I thought was a life-ending diagnosis.
Well, congratulations on coming back, and it seems stronger than ever. I can't. I would have never guessed that if you would have. I mean, wow, what a shock. So what led you to Bitcoin? Did you find Bitcoin through this journey?
Right around when I had retired and was just staying at home most of the time, someone randomly, one of my friends, had just happened to say, and this was about early 2017, that you could have anonymous money on the internet. And I, being a person that understands the internet roughly, right, being a child of the internet, was like, I don't think that's possible. So I went to go start studying Bitcoin, quickly found out it's not totally anonymous, but that's when I was hooked. I started reading and I started listening to podcasts and I started digesting any content that I could get my hands on, including books by Andreas Antonopoulos. He was the first person I was exposed to. And at that time, I grew up really conservative, really far on the right, very evangelical, right, with my parents being missionaries. When I left, being in Portland, I kind of swung to the left.
Oh, yeah.
Became someone who supports Bernie. I really liked the idea of getting money out of politics. I saw that as a key thing to help rebuild our country and really supported his ideas. And, he failed in 2016 to win the primary against Clinton. I was very disenfranchised. And when I found Andreas and he was talking about money and this idea that the problem is the money, not the money in politics, it's the money itself that's the problem. That's when I was like, holy crap, like I've missed all of it, and became very obsessed, just constantly reading, constantly studying. And then I decided I wanted to become a miner in 2017, started mining Bitcoin, taught myself how to wire electricity in order to plug the miners in, and I taught myself everything I needed to know, and started mining, got up to about 20 ASICs in my garage, which was about $2,000 to $3,000 a month in power bills. Negotiated a deal with the power company to help get that down a little bit. But, and then I stopped being an electrician when I almost killed myself too. That was a fun story that, it's about this close to having a massive jolt go through my body, and figured that was the end of it. But I was going to go full scale Bitcoin mining. I was going to go all in. This is my future, right? I finally found the thing that's going to be the thing that I always knew that I was ambitious for. But unfortunately at the time, my partner was not so orange pilled, and she thought I was going totally insane and was kind of getting to the point of making an ultimatum. She was like, you cannot buy any more of these miners. You're going to drive me crazy. So decided to keep the relationship intact. It's a long relationship. It's a healthy relationship. Don't want to sacrifice that. So kept that going, decided to stop mining, but never stopped learning about Bitcoin, kept staying focused, and just kind of kept reading and learning. Thought maybe I'd be a coder, make an app. I found out I don't have the patience for that or the wherewithal. Again, it felt like going back to school again, like I have to learn this new language. I stopped trying to pursue that. And then eventually, fast forward to 2020, early 2020, when COVID hit, Bitcoin starts getting in the news again, and we start talking about it a lot, and like, oh man, this is the moment. They're printing money. This is the moment Bitcoin's going to shine. Start to see it take off. Then Michael Saylor, in and around that time, I might have the dates mixed up a little bit there, but he jumped in as well. And I was like, man, this is so crazy. This is so exciting. And one day I just woke up and I was like, if you don't start doing something with Bitcoin as soon as possible, the opportunity to get in like early, whether it's podcasting, talking about Bitcoin, is going to be gone. And I thought maybe this is my last chance, my last shot. So jumped onto Clubhouse early 2021 and just started talking about Bitcoin, despite the fact that I honestly had horrible stage fright, was nervous, couldn't hardly speak. Yeah, I've always had really bad stage fright. Every time I've tried to get up and talk, my entire body goes cold, or used to, it doesn't anymore. It would go cold, my hands would sweat, my throat would choke up, but fought through it, just kept talking. And now I've spent, hundreds, thousands of hours talking about Bitcoin and launched the podcast. And, during that 2016 era, all the way up to 2020, it also dabbled in politics. And that's kind of how the next part of our conversation, I'm sure, will lead down that path.
Okay. Wow. Well, first of all, you hide it very well. You're a very good speaker. And from experience, public speaking, it's repetition, repetition. You know that now. So I want to talk to you about politics, because it seems like from your childhood, where it was sort of this conservative lens that you saw life through, to moving to Portland, and all of a sudden you're supporting Bernie. Can you talk to me just a little bit about, how you became passionate about politics, because you're such an activist in the space, and if your mentality sort of shifted? Because I think a lot of young people out there, I certainly have had students that are like super pro-socialist, because they think that's what's, the kindest to everybody. That's what's going to help the little guy. And then when you actually study Bitcoin and you study Austrian economics, you realize that, oh, no, actually big government intervention and the monetary system being so broken is actually the root of that. And a lot of that, some people might say would fall under the category of the left more than the right, because they're constantly wanting to spend more, right, and expand the government. So can you talk to me about, your political background and why you're so passionate about this?
I've always been very passionate about politics. Even at a young age, my dad would listen to Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity on the radio. I gained a lot of my understanding of the world from just listening to my dad's reactions to him, listening to the radio, and I'd ask questions. My dad was always just someone who's really abreast of what's going on in Washington, D.C. and in local government. So gained a lot of knowledge and insight and understanding just functionally how it works from him. And as time went on, I've just always kind of maintained that focus, always found reasons why, I want to get back involved politically, just always had a fascination with it just in general. Because, to some extent, it's very much like Bitcoin. It's permissionless. Anybody can get involved with politics. Nobody can stop you, especially here in the United States. We're so lucky to have the system that we do. I know people complain about it a lot, but there's a lot of problems. But the one great part about it is you can go out there and you can do whatever you want. You can run for office. You could become an advocate. You could become someone that writes policy. You could become an activist. And so I've always just had that passion for it around in that sense. I didn't become involved very hyper politically until 2016, when I got activated by the Bernie Sanders campaign. I'd say more 2015 was the primary going into 2016 election, was when I became very, very hyperactive, started going to the meetings, started going to, I saw him come speak up in my area. But what happened was I became extremely disillusioned by the process after watching him get completely taken down by the party itself. Like, I thought, this guy's great. He's going to win. There's no way anybody can stop him. But the mechanism and the bureaucracy of the Democratic Party actually prevented him from winning. And I was so, just like I said, completely distraught by that. And I was like, well, I'm done with this. I don't want anything to do with it. The process is broken. Stepped away from politics for a little while, and then decided that, you know what, I do really love politics, and maybe I don't want to run, or I don't want to be someone who writes policy, but I still want to work in politics. I want to be able to have an impact because I just thoroughly enjoy this type of work. Went and got trained by an organization to be a campaign manager, as well as all the other roles that are filled in a campaign. Started to help campaigns. I've done everything from opposition research to advising to strategizing to campaign management. I've also been somewhat of a behind the scenes kind of guy. Like, there was a fun story where there was two people running for the same seat, and I knew one really well, and I barely knew the other one. And I got on the phone and worked out a deal for one to leave the race and go to another race, and they both ended up winning their primary. So kind of one of my proud little stories that I have when I did politics. But it was really just a career. I had nothing that I was really fighting for. I would help anybody that I thought was a good candidate that had the right mindset. And that's where I started to become more like a centrist. I really just wanted to help people that had good ideas and people that were there for the right reasons. Instead of, left versus right, I tried to help people where I saw there was a weakness in our local government here in Oregon. It's very, very far left. And so I was trying to help get some more centrist politics involved, because I just see that as a big problem. When one state goes so far left, it's actually bad for the state itself, because the other party's not competitive. And so that creates this Overton window shift where you see, and you've seen this in Oregon, you've seen it in Portland politics, it's so far left that it's really leaving such a large group of voters out. So that's my background in politics. I've helped 4 primaries win their primaries, and I'm 4 for 4. So I'm hoping we'll be 5 for 5 with Erica Rhodes here soon.
Well, but before the pandemic, you weren't really converging the Bitcoin passion with the politics passion. It wasn't like you were connecting candidates with information or literature, and then all of a sudden that shifted. Did your conviction change with the pandemic and the Michael Saylors coming in?
It was very close together, but I hadn't quite made the shift. What happened was in 2020, because of the pandemic, it actually stopped me from working in politics because I was helping a candidate, and the only chance they had of winning was just incredible amounts of door knocking. And I mean, there was no way we were going to be able to knock any doors because of the pandemic. I mean, we were in the height of the pandemic, in the middle of his primary, and then going into the general. We needed every single moment, every single day to even have a somewhat competitive race. It was more, that race at that time was very difficult to win as is. And so we both made a decision, like, we're just done. There's no way we can do this. There's no way we can even get exposure, right? Like a lot of times people will just run races to get famous or what have you. There was just no opportunity for that. You couldn't do events. There was no way to build a coalition for yourself as a candidate. So left, started talking about Bitcoin shortly after online. And what really got me activated back into politics with Bitcoin in particular was when I saw Brad Sherman becoming super aggressively anti-Bitcoin. A group of us got into a Telegram and started thinking about, what can we do? Should we primary? We got to find someone to primary this guy, just having conversations. And eventually I decided to reach out to Erica Rhodes and ask her position via tweet. Obviously, as people know, that tweet blew up. She's jumped on the Bitcoin train since then. She's learning, she's reading, she's educating herself. She's been on dozens of podcasts now. She's written articles about Bitcoin, and she's looking to also get on the financial committees in DC so that she can help protect Bitcoin from the federal government itself, right? So that's kind of where that shift took place, was when I saw that something needed to happen here, and I jumped in to help Erica Rhodes. And since then, obviously, it's developed into something completely different. But at the time, when I jumped in with Erica, I thought, man, this is going to be really bad for my Bitcoin career, because that's what I thought. I woke up, I was like thinking to myself, this is a bad idea because the Bitcoiners are not going to like this. They don't like politics. They don't like government. And I'm going to get a lot of heat for this, but it's what needs to be done for Bitcoin, because in the United States, I want Bitcoin to win. I'm going to be here for the next 5-10 years. And so I want to ensure that Bitcoin is protected here, not just for me, but for my family, for future generations, for my community, and for everybody else that's a Bitcoiner in the United States that I know has to stay here.
Yeah, no, well, I really appreciate your work, because I think that regulation is really a big question, and you've become sort of my go-to source when it comes to updates on candidates and politics and legislation and regulation. So let's talk about some of that, Dennis. Let's talk about the regulation and legislation updates that are happening right now, because one of the headlines that we recently heard is there's going to be some sort of executive order from the president when it comes to Bitcoin, right? 10 years ago, this was internet funny money, and now all of a sudden there's like threats of national security. So tell me, I know we don't know, and it's a little bit of speculation, but what was your reaction to reading that headline, and what do you think this is going to be about?
As far as the president's executive action or executive order is concerned, there's not a whole lot anyone knows right now. I've talked to a couple people in DC. They don't feel like it's something that is a red alert moment, very much so like what happened in the summer when we had the crypto tax reporting amendment drop. That was a red alert, all hands on deck. Call your senator, call your representative, become very active on Twitter and social media and push back. And I know we'll talk about that piece of legislation here in a little bit. But with the executive order, when he says national security, it makes me think that it's most likely going to be having to do with ensuring that there's some sort of regulation or control around cross-border payments or ways to move money around. Because currently the way it works right now is the United States and its partners have a lot of control over the financial rails of the world with things like the SWIFT network. And they can actually, this is why the US government is so powerful. We can sanction countries and we can take them out of the current financial system and block them from using and being a part of the global network, which is an incredibly powerful tool. Well, Bitcoin allows that to be circumvented. I think they're looking at that ability to circumvent the current financial system very closely. and they're very concerned with what's going on with Bitcoin and various other forms of crypto, and NFTs I heard are also being looked at for kind of fraudulent, to see if there's anything going on with fraud. But mostly what's going to come from this, I imagine, is some regulation, some movement of power into the federal government, and then most likely an assembly of a framework, and maybe some sort of a committee or an organization that will go out and kind of search like what needs to be done to help prepare the federal government to regulate this type of new industry.
Yeah, no, I'm so curious what that's going to be. And it's fascinating that the price action has been a little bit disappointing, but we have all these major headlines like Texas now wants to legalize Bitcoin as tender, Arizona. So talk to me about those two, because I know you read the Arizona bill. So do you really think that states could legalize Bitcoin as tender? I'm hopeful and I wish, but I don't really think that we're ready yet for that. But you tell me your opinion.
Yeah, I mean, regardless of whether it's possible, absolutely incredible. If you would have told me even 6 months ago or a year ago that two states would be trying to legalize and make Bitcoin legal tender in the United States, in their states, I would never have believed you. I would have thought for sure, before I jumped into politics, I would have thought for sure, there's no way that this was even possible. There's no way in 2020, 2021 that I'm looking forward that we would be headed this direction. So the first one that broke was, technically it was the Arizona. Was it the Arizona one? No, it was the Don Fines one, Texas.
Yeah.
So there's a gentleman running for governor of Texas. His name is Don Fines. He's running against Greg Abbott. Greg Abbott's been great. He's actually a very big ally for Bitcoiners and in the Bitcoin industry in particular. He's been very supportive of helping Bitcoin miners to supplement the grid there in Texas, which is huge news. But there's a base case here that says, you have to be able to win over the Bitcoiners, and there's going to be a lot of competition to win these Bitcoiners over. I've been saying for a long time where, some people say single issue voter block, some say voter block, some say special interest group. Regardless, we're a new force here in the United States. We're a new group that needs to be catered to, very much like many other groups in the past. And you're seeing it on full display. You're seeing Don Fines versus Greg Abbott. And actually, I have word that there's a third coming on the way as well. That's a little bit of information as well. There's going to be another gubernatorial candidate that is pro-Bitcoin coming in the path. So you will potentially have a three-way race for the governor of Texas, 3 ways of 3 Bitcoiners or pro-Bitcoin candidates. And it's just really exciting and crazy to watch it unfold. Don Fines actually has a whole plan for Bitcoin, which includes protecting it from the federal government, creating an agency to help bring more Bitcoiners to Texas itself, things with energy. It's great. You should go check it out on his website. He has a whole policy page on it, which I think you're going to see a lot more people have a policy position on Bitcoin. I've said for a long time that it's not going to be, are you pro or anti-Bitcoin? It's going to be like, what's your policy? How are you going to incentivize Bitcoin industry to be here in the USA? How are you going to make sure the miners are protected from something like a CCP China situation where they all got kicked out? So yes, huge news. But then going into the Arizona news, we have a representative from the state legislature there who put forward a bill to have Arizona be legalize Bitcoin as legal tender. But it's not passed or anything yet. It's just introduced. It probably won't pass, to be honest, because a lot of times in America, it takes 4 or 5 times for new ideas like these to really make their way through a legislator. But it's still incredibly earth-shattering news. I mean, you saw Bitcoin Magazine, all the big accounts posting about it, talking about it, and getting probably some of the biggest engagement they've gotten in weeks or months just because of the news of it attempting to be passed.
Yeah, well, I was surprised that our Senator Lummis wasn't the first with one of these kinds of bills, but maybe Wyoming will be one of the next. And I think that it highlights what you mentioned earlier, that states are really going to be competing. Hopefully nation states are going to be competing. I saw, the news of Russia, Vladimir Putin saying that they have a competitive edge when it comes to Bitcoin mining. They shouldn't be banning it. And I sure hope that Russia doesn't figure this out before the US does, right? I mean, have you thought about that a little bit and all the geopolitical things that are happening in Kazakhstan and Russia, which have so much of the hash rate?
Absolutely. I'm always looking into how we can make sure the United States can outcompete other countries. I know that a lot of people, a lot of Bitcoiners, kind of been dissatisfied with the United States, but this is an opportunity for us to show what we're really about. This is freedom technology. It's freedom money. And the United States was built on freedom, and it was built on a little bit of rebellion. So I think that the United States is really poised to rebel against the Fed, rebel against the Federal Reserve, rebel against the current financial system that we've created, which does benefit us, but ultimately Bitcoin is inevitable. So are we just going to try to maintain the status quo and lose our competitive edge to countries like Russia and China? I don't think so. I want to make sure the United States is a part of the future instead of the past. But, when it comes to Russia, I think it would be pretty smart of them to start looking into Bitcoin, especially if the United States is threatening to kick them out of the financial system. That's what they did. They said that they would consider removing them from SWIFT. Yeah. And that's when you're starting to kind of see these rumblings of Russia looking at Bitcoin. It was funny. I put out a tweet a few weeks ago saying, future headline, Russia prices all oil in Bitcoin. And it's like, I thought it would be a few years off, but maybe it's sooner than we think.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. So let's talk about some of the things you're going to be watching when it comes to regulation. You tweeted about the America Competes Act, right? So tell us a little bit about that and some of the concerns about cryptocurrency exchanges and transactions here in the US.
So the America Competes Act is a big bill. It's 3,000 pages, and the process is probably going to get it pushed through. But the premise of why this bill was created was to make America more competitive with China via supply chain issues. I think there's also some, the core issues is something around visas and helping to bring more talent here into the USA. So generally it's it has good intentions, but unfortunately there was a provision snuck into that bill, which this is the problem with American politics is we get these really big bills, they have to pass, and then they slip all of this other junk inside of them. And that's where all the trouble comes from. That's where all the issues rise up, because they're saying, well, aren't you in favor of competing with China and getting talent here in the United States? You're like, yeah, but you snuck all this crap in here that makes me not want to vote for the bill. And that's what they've done here. What they did was they made changes to the Bank Secrecy Act. So the Bank Secrecy Act has been around a long time, and it's used to prevent money laundering, and which is fine, right? That's great. But it was changed recently via the Patriot Act. And what they did was they gave the Treasury a lot of extra power. And some of the power that they granted them was to be able to approve or deny certain types of transactions and spy on people, all sorts of stuff that is really un-American in the first place. But now they're trying to remove some of the safeguards around the use of that really incredible power. Currently, if the Treasury Secretary wants to use this power to spy on people, spy on your accounts, to ban you, whatever, right? They have to report it. They have to let the public know. There has to be public rulemaking, involve the public in the process. And then if they do decide to ban you or spy on you, it's a 120-day length. They cannot exceed the 120 days. Well, this new amendment removes all of those safeguards. So even if you're not someone who's like, yay, Bitcoin, yay, crypto, you should really be against this, because it just removes all of the privacy that you have and allows the US government.
Right? And due process. So you could have your account frozen.
No due process, no warning. They can't even, oftentimes they can't even tell you why they're doing it or why you've been blocked from using the service. And to some extent it does. I know there's a part in there, which is important to include, that it does require it to be some sort of a foreign transaction involved. But I mean, the Bitcoin network is very decentralized. Like, it's all over the whole globe. It's not hard for them to figure out a way to say, well, that transaction came from a miner or that pool over there, because most of the pools aren't even based in the United States. So you can see it's very perilous. More or less would cover the majority of Bitcoin transactions. They could ban even financial institutions from doing business with you. So it's just really, really not good for privacy. It's not good for your individual rights, individual freedoms. And it just gives the government more power, which is unnecessary, really, at this point in our history.
Right. And we know from history that these little steps in surveillance or spying can just domino effect into something that we can no longer take back or walk back. So we have to kind of raise awareness right before it actually goes through, because later it's going to be hard to dismantle once we give away our freedoms.
Absolutely.
What about the infrastructure bill? Because there are obviously concerns with that too, right? For anything that was over $10,000, having to take down all this information and classifying minors and people within the space incorrectly. Can you update people on the status of that and what they should be watching for this year?
Absolutely. So that is really the main reason why so many Bitcoiners became extremely active in the political space. We had obviously always had some level of involvement, but it was typically from, I would say, like the crypto space and from exchanges and from industry. It wasn't like Bitcoiners themselves. But now Bitcoiners are becoming extremely active because of this recent attempt by the federal government to continue kind of relabeling the industry. So one of the big problems was the broker status relabel, which would redefine large swaths of the industry, including miners, node operators, hardware developers, software developers, pretty much anybody and everybody would be relabeled as a broker. And the reason why it's bad for people to be relabeled as a broker is because under US law, if you are considered to be a broker, you have to report the financial information of those people that you're essentially like helping them transact, right? So if you're a miner, you have to report on any transactions that come through node operator, hardware, software. You got a wallet on your phone. Those people would have to start reporting on you. But the problem with the Bitcoin network is it doesn't share third-party information. You don't have to say, this is my name, this is my social, this is my address in order to transact on the Bitcoin network.
Yep. That's
good for two reasons. One, it prevents fraud and makes it permissionless. But the problem here is that because the law is written, even though it's impossible to comply, it doesn't matter. It allows the government to essentially either come in and say, you're done, you're out of business because you're breaking the law. More or less, it puts a gun to the head of the industry and allows the government to pick winners and losers, which is something they love to do, but it should definitely be pushed back against. Also, there's another part in the bill called 6050I. The problem with 6050I, yes, is that it relabels Bitcoin or digital transactions on any crypto platform as cash transactions. Mm-hmm. This does two things. One, it forces you to have to report on that transaction. So let's say when you, normal day, you're going and you're like, I'm going to spend $10,000 on a car or $10,000 on a new TV. Nice TV. You'll have to report that transaction to the IRS. And that's true with the people that you're buying it from. They have to have you fill out a piece of paperwork. Or, if it's if it's cash.
So it treats it as cash. Yeah. Okay.
Exactly. The other thing that it does that's really bad though is they lowered the limit. So it was $10,000. They dropped it down to $600, which is like nothing, right? So it's very, very, very low. It's a very low amount. And it's really just an intrusion on your privacy and your rights because all this information is going to the Financial Crime Enforcement Network. Are you a criminal buying things for $600? You think a money launderer is trying to launder $600 at a time? Like, it's a very small amount of money to be laundering. So it's a big problem. It's passed. It's going to go into law next year. And there is efforts, though, underway, fortunately, for that to be undone, which is probably the next part of where we're going to be headed.
Okay, wait. So is that the Keep Innovation in America Act? Is that one
there
of them?
There you go.
Okay.
You got it. Yeah.
Kia Act. Okay.
Yeah, Kia Act. I like that better.
Tell us about that. We're really going through all of the things that people need to know.
So the KIA Act, or Kia Act, as you so eloquently have put it, I haven't tried to use that one before, is a bill that was put together by a bipartisan group of members of the House, which I love to see because I really believe Bitcoin is bipartisan. And so we have 6 Republicans, 4 Democrats. The bill was put together by Patrick McHenry, a Republican. And also there was some help from a strong Democrat on that one as well. I believe it was Tim Ryan. That was introduced in November. So it's sitting right now and we're trying to get more support for it to pass. Basically what the Keep Innovation in America Act does is it changes the broker definition so that it excludes, all of the Bitcoin and crypto sphere from that redefinition of that label, right? The premise is like, if I'm sending a transaction on the behest of someone and I can influence the direction or where that transaction goes, then I have to I have to deliver the information. That's how the old system works. At PayPal, Visa, MasterCard, you're telling them where you want it to send it, and they're like kind of doing it for you, right? They're actually taking that money and moving it around and putting it in the right place on your behest. That's not true with Bitcoin. They're not actually doing that for you. So that would keep all of the Bitcoin network and it would keep large swaths of the crypto industry completely out of this redefinition. It also takes that $600 limit and brings it back up to the $10,000 amount. So that's a very good step in the right direction for both of those things.
It's amazing how, I mean, there's so many more activists piling into this space, and literally something comes out and all of us, especially on Bitcoin Twitter, right? We hop on it right away. There's a hearing on Bitcoin mining, like everyone's read the documents and we're ready to go and respond to people's FUD or their misinformation. So it makes me really, really excited. And another thing
I get pumped about it.
Yeah.
I get pumped about it. It's like it's like we have one of the strongest social media communities on earth. This is the interesting thing is, when it came to some of the other stuff that's coming out, they've started to say, and we'll probably, this is part of the next one that I'd like to talk about if we have an opportunity to, they're actually getting afraid of us in DC. They're like, oh my gosh, this group we don't want to mess with them. That's what happened when the crypto tax reporting amendment came and we all got riled up and got wild and started calling everybody. They don't like that. They don't like when we do stuff like that. So again, I'm trying to say, people out there, the Bitcoin crypto, we're kind of parallel voter blocks, disjointed single issue voters. We are having an impact. Do not think that you're not having an impact just because we haven't had our wins yet. The wins are coming. We're just getting started in the political space. Stay on it. Keep pushing, keep calling your representatives, keep calling your senators, and make sure you apply pressure, because if you apply pressure, that's the one thing that has an impact. When you call, write letters, email, attend meetings, donate to their opponents, stop donating to them. This is all the stuff, including the lobbying that's going on. I mean, it is having an incredible impact on DC.
I should try that, because I've tried to reach some of the big names in the political space just to be like, hey, let's talk about Bitcoin. But I've never tried to intro with, I'm going to donate to the other guy. But hey, let's talk about Senator Lummis, because she's one of our biggest supporters in terms of the folks in Washington. And she's coming out with a bill, right, to create a new regulatory body to oversee crypto. We know she came out and said she owned like 5 Bitcoins. What do you know about that bill?
As far as the Lummis bill is concerned, it's kind of the same thing. It's a little bit of a speculation, but fortunately, she's from the Senate Banking Committee, which is a powerful committee in DC. She's obviously one of our biggest supporters. She stood on the floor of the Senate and said, thank God for Bitcoin, which is just truly incredible. But you're right. She's going to be creating a new agency, which is really what we need. This is a totally new type of money. It's a totally new industry, totally new financial instrument. We don't want the old financial instruments or old organizations looking over the top of this thing. We need something new. So she's going to create a new organization, and she's going to have the CFTC and the SEC work together to run and control it, which I think is a smart play on her part. But what's going to be inside that bill, for the most part, we know, is consumer protections, stable coin regulation, and also the creation of that new organization. I think the stable coin regulation is important. I would much rather see us go down a path of having a intelligently regulated stablecoin industry instead of the CBDC dystopian CCP path. I mean, it's also wild that Tom Emmer, wrote a bill to ban CBDCs, and people all along thought we were going to be banning Bitcoin instead. It's so fun to watch how this plays out.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting, because obviously they see the stable coins as sort of a threat to their digital dollar that they're working on. And that has just, so many impacts in society once we get those CBDCs, which I know are inevitable, unfortunately. But let's talk about the... Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, it's likely though with the stable coins, you're going to see a lot of, that's where their big focus is going to be, because 2 things. 1, they got to protect the dollar. And 2, they don't really like this DeFi stuff that's going on out there. So they really want to regulate stable coins and bring it under their purview. You could see moves to have the stablecoin industry completely pulled under the purview of the federal banking system and the federal government, so that they can make sure they're controlling it. I don't know if that's going to happen. I prefer it stay privatized and just well regulated.
Well, earlier you mentioned the SEC, and that's the other thing I was going to ask you about, because there's a big question mark. I mean, will this be the year that they start to redefine some of the other cryptocurrencies as securities? Personally, I'm not worried about Bitcoin because it is digital property. I don't think that they're going to have anything that they can say negative about it. I think Gary's actually pretty bullish on it. But tell me what your thoughts are on what the SEC is going to do, and maybe what we should watch out for this year.
SEC, again, one of those kinds where things we're speculating, but we're reading the tea leaves. We're trying to figure out what's going to happen. And a couple of the things that have come from the SEC, though, that I do like is when Gary Gensler talks about something passing the Howey test. He's very clearly said that Bitcoin does not pass the Howey test. The Howey test is a test that you don't want to pass because if you do, it says that you're a security. So a lot of these organizations, a lot of these crypto companies are spending large amounts of money lobbying and making sure that they don't pass this test, because that would mean a couple of really big things in this industry. One, they'd be relabeled as a security, which would be bad for them because immediately after they're relabeled as a security, they cannot be sold on a crypto exchange because crypto exchanges are not regulated to sell securities. So could have a very big impact on crypto markets. A lot of people have been talking about this for some time. There's very clearly many cryptos other than Bitcoin that are not securities. I mean, it's very obvious that things like Litecoin and even things like Dogecoin, those were all kind of created in the same essence, that way that Bitcoin was. But there are a lot of cryptos out there. I think particularly I look at anything with a large pre-mine, with early investors, because that's very much like what happens in the securities world. You have early investors, you have seed funding, and I have no problem with that. But you have to do it legally. You can't just go out and fraudulently raise money and not report on it. There's a reason why we have these laws, and it's actually to protect consumers from fraudulent investment opportunities. Because if they're not reporting how much was pre-mined or how much was given to the early investors, at what rate, you have no idea of knowing that. It's actually impossible to know that with these cryptos, which I think isn't fair to the average person. They should be able to know what they're getting into. So yeah, from the SEC, we don't really know. I will say I'm not necessarily the type of person who gets angry at Gary Gensler because he hasn't done anything yet. I'm a Bitcoin only person. So for me, the longer he keeps the federal government out of the hands of out of the crypto world, the better. I think him kind of pausing and not doing anything for a long time has made the rest of the federal government kind of sit back and be like, what's Gary going to do? And then he hasn't done anything. And so it gave us almost all this extra time to be able to prepare Bitcoin for adoption in the USA.
Isn't it amazing how we're at a point in society where the concentration of power it's like we're waiting on one person to say something, whether it's Jay Powell or Gary. I mean, like that's the problem. Crazy. The concentration of political power as a result of the concentration of economic power. Shout out to Svetsky for saying that. It's true. It's a huge issue. Before we start to wrap up, one of the things I do want to touch on is your passion for making sure that Bitcoin is bipartisan. And right now, unfortunately, a lot of the representatives and the politicians in Washington who are quicker to kind of understand the message, they're on the right. And I think, part of it is that idea of, freedom, small government, fewer taxes, all of that aligns very closely with the principles of people who love Bitcoin. But on the left, banking the unbanked and sort of allowing people financial access and the ability to be included in a wealth transfer, that's very progressive. So can you talk to me about your passion for bipartisan Bitcoin? We're going to have another Spaces, and just why both sides should be passionate about Bitcoin.
I, from the very beginning, have been someone who's seen it to be very important to have Bitcoin be something bipartisan in this country. Ultimately, I've become very upset and disappointed with the level of divisiveness that we have in this country. I think that to some extent, fiat drives that divisiveness. I think that it is part of the cancer that is causing this country to fall apart. The biggest problem we have right now is the money itself. And what's the problem with the federal government having so much control over the money printer and the ability to spend that unlimited money wherever they want is the incentive for ultra high net worth, wealthy individuals, special interest groups, multinationals to want to get involved heavily in federal politics, because the ability to have control over that money printer it's an incredible power. And so they're too incentivized to want to get involved. Now we have elections where you could be running for a small U.S. House seat, and it could take $2-3 million just to win your race, which just really isn't something that the average person can go out and collect. So it automatically just cuts certain people off from being involved in the political process. It cuts large swaths of our population from having an opportunity to represent their people. And that's just a small seat. You have races going for $100 million sometimes for these Senate seats, and $1 billion or more plus for a president. So really what's happening is you've seen a distortion of politics in this country because of the money printer. And I used to think it was like Bernie Sanders. I used to think, okay, we need to stop or ban the money from coming in, but you're never going to be able to do that. The incentive is just too strong. They'll always find a way in. So you really need to disincentivize them from wanting to be involved politically. And then when we see that happen, I truly believe we'll see elected officials who are more beholden to the people. Yeah. They're more beholden to their populace and to the people in their district instead of to the special money and the big money. Because when you're taking a political calculation on whether or not you're going to run, you're always thinking in the back of your mind, man, I really don't want this company to drop $10 million in my opponent's race. Right. So even if you're a good person, the money corrupts your ability to make good decisions for you and your community. So I'm a big fan of Bitcoin, making it bipartisan, also to make sure that both sides can contribute and that we don't see one side use this as a bludgeon to attack the other side, because you and me both know Bitcoin's going to win, right? Like it's going to win. And if one side is winning only and the other side is losing, we get that same thing I talked about earlier. We get an extreme imbalance in our government and we go really far to one side or the other. And that's really bad for the people. That's really bad for the government. It's really bad for the country.
Yeah, I am so passionate about the idea that Bitcoin could stop the rent seeking, the money printing and malinvestments, the crony capitalism, and bring back a sense of accountability that you are responsible for the people you represent and the money that you're spending. So, just out of curiosity, because of your background and how, it seems like you've gone through sort of these transformations that are both, philosophical and political. What about the religion aspect? Because one thing that I've found really interesting about the Bitcoin space is I meet a lot of Christians. You mentioned Lummis is on stage there. Thank God for Bitcoin, Jimmy Song's book. Have your views about that changed at all? I don't know if you're willing to share, but just curious.
The interesting thing is the one particular point that I'd like to bring up around my views that has changed is more so my view of Bitcoin. Because of the understanding that I have of religion, and also kind of using that new understanding of Bitcoin to reflect back on religion itself. And that understanding that I came to is that social communities are really, really important. And in the Bitcoin community, we have a pretty strong understanding of when you go anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world, that you're going to find someone. If you're in a Bitcoin community, you go to a Bitcoin community in Germany, you go to the Bitcoin community in El Salvador, you're going to get there and you're going to get along with people. You're going to have a good time. You can build a society. You can build friendships. You can build networks off of that base layer understanding of each other. And that's really important. That's really important for society. And I think that that's one of the key benefits that religion has continuously offered to society is that same value set. And that's one of the things that I do admire about Christianity. In my time as someone who was a Christian, I studied Christianity pretty heavily. I went to Bible college at some point. That was the only college that I didn't drop out of. I wouldn't really even call it a college. It was like Bible school for adults. And so one of the things I really appreciated now, though, is that you can go anywhere and you can have that same value set that you all agree on, that you has a base layer. And I think that's really a big part of why you have seen in the United States we've had a lot of success, because there was this like common base layer of values that we have been built on for a long time. So I always have an appreciation for, the Christians in my family, other Christians that I meet. I think it's a very valuable thing to be a part of a community of people who have same values and same, understanding of the world.
No, that's awesome. I love that. And value is such an important word to me, because I feel like we've lost a sense of some of our values, our American values, our human values. And I think all of it is what you mentioned. It's rooted with our broken monetary system. And it's like people don't see anything outside of the paradigm because they don't get it, because they don't understand Bitcoin yet. And we do. And we're like inserting, not only knowledge, but I think a value system, a better incentive system into society by spreading the message. So, well, wrapping it up back in politics, you mentioned earlier, it's so important to get people involved. So just what's your kind of message of how people can help, regardless of what side they're on, what state or city they live in, what should people do? And, what do you want them to know?
When it comes to getting involved in politics, like I said, it's very permissionless. You can get involved any way you want. But some of the things that I'm doing in particular, I think people have been really attracted to. I have started a Telegram where people can jump in there and they can talk to other people in the United States that are making an effort to make sure Bitcoin is adopted in the USA. There's various organizations starting up out there. You have the Bitcoin Today Coalition. You have also the Bitcoin Policy Institute. And there's a couple of things I'm working on behind the scenes as well. Hopefully to have more news on that as time goes on. But really, it just comes down to the basics. Like, don't wait for these organizations to give you something to do. Go call your senator, go call your representative, call your local elected officials, tell them that you're there and that you support Bitcoin, that you're what the biggest thing is like, tell them that your life, your financial life depends on Bitcoin, that when they regulate Bitcoin, it hurts you, not just financially, but also your business. If you have a business out there that it depends on Bitcoin sales, tell them that you have a business in their district, and they're going to say, "Oh, wow, I didn't know that I had a constituency that involved Bitcoiners." So it really just comes down to those things. And if you really still feel super passionate about Bitcoin, get in touch with me when it comes to politics, and maybe we'll see if we can get some more Bitcoiners to run here soon when it comes to 2024.
Well said. I love it. All right. So when's our first Bitcoin president? Give me your prediction.
Well, I do have that famous tweet. I predicted that there would be a pro-Bitcoin president by 2024. I think there's a real chance that we convince one of the people that are running in 2024 that they should be pro-Bitcoin, and that I think that there's a chance that they change their position on it and start adopting it.
It's definitely going to be in the debates. So maybe one of us can moderate.
Yeah, there we go. Let's keep getting your mainstream media news angles, and soon enough we'll be the one moderating it.
Oh man. Well, Dennis, thank you so much. This was awesome. Anything else you want to share?
No, that's pretty much it. Just got to keep encouraging people to apply pressure. And I'll say this, even if you don't want to get involved politically in Bitcoin, just get involved in Bitcoin any way you can. You won't regret it. I know like I said, I started beginning of last year, and never knew that I would be involved with politics when I started with Bitcoin. I thought I'd be, like I said, a miner or a coder, but eventually fell into something that worked for me. Just do whatever you can, start working in the space, and I absolutely promise you'll have a great time, make great people, and you won't regret a single moment of it.